And there is a real fundamental problem in this country with illegal immigration. It is perceived by the population. And unless the politicians start coming up with some kind of serious ideas and smash the gangs and stop the boats, have made the situation worse, where there is a political sense that they're talking the rhetoric, they talk the talk, but they cannot walk the walk, then you are going to have real protests taking place.
Illegal immigration is 3% of immigration in this country. And if the immigration numbers are too high, maybe you want to look at what they were 10 years ago before we left the EU. That's a good place to start.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And she returns finally after her long sojourn away. We thought you'd lost your passport, but you haven't.
My pass.
And it's very nice. Your passport and your pass, obviously, both very important. It's good to have you back. I just wonder, a month away, I know you've been consuming the news while you've been away. Does Britain feel different, look different? Do you see it from a different perspective from having been out the country?
I'll leave you alone for 5 minutes. I thought you'd killed Donald Trump.
Oh, no, we're going to come. We are, I promise you, going to come to Donald Trump and whether we've killed him off later in the podcast. But go on. Does Britain look different?
Very. Yeah, very. It's odd, isn't it? Just seeing it from afar and sort of wondering where the country's spine has got to, actually.
Well, look, we have a sort of reorganisation to welcome you back at the top of the government.
It's very nice
which
of the
is
PM
very
to do
good
that.
of Keir Starmer to give us a decent story when we've been scrabbling around in the undergrowth for weeks now waiting for something good to happen. And it looks like there is an attempt at a reset in the terms of Darren Jones being appointed to this kind of new title in Downing Street as Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, no longer Chief Secretary of the Treasury, but Secretary to the Prime Minister. And Darren Jones, Junior Cabinet Minister, has now got a very much more enhanced role right at the centre of government to deliver on Starmer's pledges.
Yeah, you've got this new phalanx, it seems, who are all surrounding Starmer now. David Dinsmore has been brought in from The Sun. Tim Allen, bit older, but a former Blairite, seemed to be very good in his job some 20 years ago. Good mate of yours, I know. You've got Darren Jones, who may or may not be moving into a role that feels a little bit more like a deputy PM role, but they're insisting it isn't. And I guess it's part of a beefing up the team around Starmer to tell his story for him better than he can.
So what we discussed on the podcast last week when you were still on holiday with Lewis was that, but what is the story he is trying to tell? What are the clear messages? What is the driving kind of force, the narrative of this government? What is it that Keir Starmer wants to have achieved at the end of 5 years? And that has always sort of been rather hard to get your hands on, to touch, to make feel real. I suppose we've had a hint of that today, where Starmer has sort of set out 3 objectives that are going to be the signs of whether success has been reached or not. And one is about you genuinely feel better off than you did before. You feel the effects of economic growth. 2 is getting a grip on the migration crisis. 3, the health service working for you.
Yeah, I was speaking to somebody very close to Starmer this morning, and they put it to me like this. They said the Labour strategy over the summer has basically been Farage is right, don't vote for him. Right? Farage is right, don't vote for him. In other words, they've been following in the shoes, even in the rhetoric, even in the sort of places that he's been trying to take the Labour Party, and then turning around and saying, but we're doing it better. And it just doesn't hold water. And actually, Labour is clearly trying to find a place where it can be more courageous, a place where it can take risks. And I think the debate now is what that actually means. Does it mean standing up to Farage, or does it mean implementing reform policies more quickly than he can? And I think that is the definitive place that they've got to start choosing, because, this Labour insider said to me, what has been missing over the summer, maybe even longer, is the values chat. That is what has been missing. So when Farage starts talking about deporting people back to the Taliban. Sorry, we can't care about all of that. Sorry, we don't care if there's Afghan women that have been escaping that. Sorry, we don't care if there are people who've been helping our armed services and working on behalf of the military when we were actually at war with the Taliban in Afghanistan. We're going to deport them anyway. There's been no real pushback from the Labour Party. They've been very technocratic about this. They've been very technocratic about numbers or about sort of what they need to do or about how they need to move people around the asylum hotels. But you haven't heard anyone say, this is not who we are. And I guess, your friend Tim Allen, who worked very closely with Tony Blair, there are people now who are sort of saying, remember how Tony Blair responded to Farage? 20 years ago, 2005, in the European Parliament, he just cut through with a message that sort of appealed to what British people think of themselves, which is like, we get the numbers are too big. We get immigration is a much bigger problem than it ever was pre-Brexit. But this is not who we are. Just a reminder of what he said then.
Just tell you, sir, and your colleagues, you sit with our country's flag. You do not represent our country's interests. This is the year 2005. This is the year 2005, not 1945. We're not fighting each other anymore. These are our partners, they're our colleagues, and our future lies in Europe.
And that, I think, is what's been missing. There's been no attempt to sort of say, do you like what this country is sounding like now? Do you like what Farage is making you feel like right now? Because we've lost that sense of who we are.
So I think that it's quite interesting. I mean, you talk about my mate Tim Allen. I'm going to reveal that last weekend I spent the whole weekend with him at his place on the East Coast, and I came back without the story that he was rejoining Downing Street. So,
well done. Top work.
Tim, I don't blame you. I wouldn't have trusted me with that story anyway if I had to keep it secret.
But he knew,
for a
you
week.
think?
I think he probably did know. But there were things he was saying. Look, he was very critical about a lot of how the government was communicating. So there's a job of work to do there. But I am struck when you talk about 2005 that you have got Tim Allen, who was deputy to Alistair Campbell at the start of the Labour government, back in at number 10. You've got Jonathan Powell as the National Security Advisor, and some would say the real Foreign Secretary. You've got Mandelson in Washington. I mean, all you need is to appoint Tony Blair to the House of Lords and make him honorary Prime Minister, and you've got the whole Blair project back together. And there is an element of that. And Liz Lloyd. And so you've got all these people who were part of the Blair project now back in seats of power. And it's like Keir Starmer has tried for a year to get things sorted and is actually going back to the old guard who did things rather well. And maybe the communications will be better. But, Tony Blair back in 2005, it was a different world we were living in.
He didn't have a mobile phone.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know what Tim Allen is like on TikTok, but they're not digital natives. They haven't come into a world where everything was about the visuals before it was even about the policy. Now, presumably, there will be people around them. There will be kind of younger people around them who know exactly how to get this sort of stuff sold. And I'm not trying to reduce the whole of the workings of government or even its communication strategy to a TikTok meme. But you do have to think that they've got to be really careful that they're not trying to recreate something that has been and
recreate
gone.
A band that broke up years ago when musical tastes have changed.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the problem. And I think that's a really real question. I mean, David Dinsmore was an editor of The Sun. The Sun circulation years ago is nothing like what the Sun circulation is today. Tim set up a really successful communications company, Portland Communications, which, he sold a little while ago. The world has changed because of social media and a way you communicate on TikTok, on Insta, on all the other platforms where you have to be seen all the time and create original content in a way that I don't know who I would point to on the Labour benches as being someone. Jenrick is doing it, Farage is doing it, and doing it well, using that medium well. But I don't know who else on the Labour side is.
The only thing I'd say, though, is that this is about something bigger than that. It is about a story, and it's about a voice at the heart of this, I think, which has kind of been forgotten, right? And there are many places where Labour could have really kicked back and didn't. I mean, when we look at the immigration numbers, Labour just has to say they were at 200,000 before Brexit. They've quadrupled in the last 10 years, right? The Boris wave. Boris Johnson sent immigration sky high. Now, arguably it was because he saw that post-Brexit there weren't enough Brits that were willing to do the jobs, and he wanted to open up the jobs for other people to come in and do them. Nevertheless, that is a Boris wave. Have they pinned that onto him and onto his strategy? Had they pinned onto Farage the enormous economic suffering that came as a result of his last policy, right? Even he will not admit that Brexit's been a success. He just says, oh, it was somebody else's fault. Always somebody else's fault. And it does seem to me that when we start looking at, for example, the ECHR, and we're going to be hearing more from Yvette Cooper about the changes that they're considering, sort of opening places to push back on some of the judgments, fine. But you've got Jack Straw, former Home Office in the Blair years, saying we've got to leave the ECHR, and it does seem to me it sort of kicks off a Brexit muscle memory, and without going too Nemo about the whole thing, it's like, first they came for the EU, Brexit. Well, that wasn't enough. Then they're coming for the ECHR. That won't be enough. Then they'll come for the Geneva Convention. That won't be enough. Then they'll come for the right to remain. And before you know it, you get to the Douglas Carswell type tweet, which says, it's time to get rid of, his words, the Abdals. And so as soon as you start leaning into this language, as soon as you start thinking, oh, maybe Farage has a point. Oh, maybe they've got to do more. Oh, yes, we mustn't forget how strongly people think about it. Don't they realise that Farage's policies are not about creating a better Britain? They're about destruction. Okay. They're about pulling things down because that is how you get into power. Really easy to be in opposition. Everyone wants to be in opposition because you just get to destroy things. You don't then get to have to rebuild them. And that's what he does.
Just for people who kind of who've missed the meteoric and successful career of Douglas Carswell. He was a Conservative MP who then defects to UKIP. Just read the tweet, because I think it gives a context to it, which is, it is an extraordinary thing for a former, considered thoughtful Conservative politician to say.
So the tweet from Douglas Carswell over the weekend, I mean, we should say that he was the MP for Clacton, where Nigel Farage now sits, and he was very much part of the Conservative Party until he wasn't, and he defected to UKIP. And he just tweeted, "From Epping to the sea, let's make England Abdul free." Now, Douglas Carswell clearly doesn't speak for the Tory party or even for the Reform Party now. He lives in Mississippi and he runs a kind of think tank in America. But my point is, every time you think you're leaning into a good solution, you're not. It's just going to go further and further and further. And I think it's incredible that we haven't learned that yet.
Okay, so you say, let's start with Brexit, and first they came for Brexit, and then they came for the ECHR, and then they, and the Niemöller kind of retort about Nazism.
Sorry. I mean, I'm not remotely.
No,
this is not a Godwin's law. I'm not remotely trying to take us to Nazism. No, just to clarify.
Sure. But I do think that the risk of going in the other direction is that you don't recognise that there is a problem. And there is a real fundamental problem in this country with illegal immigration. It is perceived by the population. And unless the politicians start coming up with some kind of serious ideas and smash the gangs and stop the boats, have made the situation worse, where there is a political sense that they're talking the rhetoric, they talk the talk, but they cannot walk the walk, then you are going to have real protests taking place. And I think that the sense of anger about illegal immigration is real. And I think the politicians are right to look at things that they can do. And the ECHR was a treaty that was built after the Second World War. And is it fit for purpose today, given the problems that we face today. I don't think that is illegitimate to be looking at those sort of questions to see if there is something that can be done about it. And I don't think that for politicians to say, oh, for God's sake, we don't need to talk about this. That is what we got wrong over Brexit.
No, I think the two are not remotely incompatible. And I think to reduce it to that suggests that you have to, do one or the other. I mean, as I've said, the problem of immigration, right, has gone from 200,000 to nearly 1 million, is a massive, you can see that. You can see the numbers are too big, right? There is nothing that stops Keir Starmer from looking at how he gets that number down. Absolutely fine. But I think this knee-jerk, which is, oh, well, Farage is suggesting that if we don't follow that, then we're going to look like the ones that are out of touch, is completely wrong. I mean, Jeremy Hunt, funnily enough, in his book, when we talked to him a few months ago, he was saying that Starmer should be the one in charge. As a former director of prosecutions, he should be in charge of helping to rewrite the ECHR. I have no problem with that. Absolutely, right? If there are places where you can tighten, if there are places where you can re-examine, if you do want to say we're no longer in 1952, we're now in 2025, 100%. I don't think that laws should be stuck in sort of, in a sarcophagus for sort of 70 years and not re-examined. My point is that there is a kind of a movement that suggests that if you're, your question about the protests, right? We genuinely don't know. We genuinely don't know how strong the public feeling was before Nigel Farage and Jenrick started telling people they should feel angry about them. Right? I'm not saying that there isn't frustration with people in hotels. I'm not saying there isn't frustration with the number of migrants. But yeah, we genuinely don't know. The number of protests in the population is tiny, right?
We've seen the opinion polls of the rise and rise and rise of reform.
This is my point.
But that's because of the failure of conventional politics, the Tories and Labour, to deal with the scale of the problem.
Or that's the cleverness of reform. Reform points to the things that he thinks that people should be feeling really angry about, and then before you know it, people feel angry about it.
You can say it is grievance politics, but you can't just say that the voters don't have a right to feel aggrieved.
No.
And I think that is the kind of crux of the issue, that if you just dismiss...
It's not about dismissing.
No.
I've told you, I can totally see the numbers. The numbers speak for themselves. But when you say there are these huge protests... Now, let's be honest about the protests, because many of these asylum hotels have been used for the past 4 years, right? We haven't seen protests outside the asylum hotels for 4 years. So is it about having people in your midst? Most people, we live near to shared social housing, which has got asylum seekers in it. But most people don't know, right? They know as soon as Jenrick or Rees-Mogg or Farage stands outside a hotel and says, why aren't you feeling angry? Right? That's my point.
But the Epping Forest protests outside the Bell Hotel, for example, started organically. They were not. I mean, there was someone accused of sexual assault.
Which is a totally different case, right? If you are worried about people in your community being sexually harassed or worse by people inside, of course that's understandable. But that is not the same as pretending that the whole world is protesting about this. They're not.
So I want to circle back to kind of where we started about how the government communicates these sort of issues. Stephen Morgan, a junior education minister, was on Sky TV this morning, and he was being asked about some hideous graffiti put on outside a Chinese takeaway in York. And this is the exchange.
A takeaway that's completely covered with graffiti and telling people to go home, and people who are shouting at each other in the streets. This is Britain in 2025, and for years governments have talked about the strength of multiculturalism. But now that is under threat. People want to see real action now, not only to deal with migration, but also to deal with the psyche of the nation in parts. What can you say you will do today, tomorrow, and next week that will deliver concrete change?
Well, I'm proud to be part of a government that is a mission-driven government that wants to bring about change in our country. On my brief, I've set out some of the things that we're doing to ease the pressures on parents and deliver meaningful change for children and young people across our country. The Prime Minister wants us to go further and faster. That's what we're delivering to make sure we fix the foundations of our economy and restore public services and drive growth in our country. And that's what we're going to be doing as Parliament returns today.
It's really interesting that it's been termed graffiti. You know, we heard the Sky News anchor call it graffiti. It's actually, and I'm looking at the picture now, it's 3 St George's flags. It says England, and then it says cat and dog and geet up. But it's quite interesting that in this context, the St George's flag is seen as unmistakably hostile. Right? You know, the flag that everyone's been saying, oh, we love our sports, we love our flag, we love our country. When you've daubed it on the Dragon House, you know, a restaurant in York, the intention is clear. It means go home.
Yeah, but why can't the Labour minister engage with the question? And also, frankly, if I hear anyone say we are part of a mission-driven government, it's just not talking to people. It's not communicating with what people's concerns are.
But I think this goes back to the conversation that we're having. If that minister is in a place where he doesn't know whether to say, this is not who we are, because half the people in the cabinet want to say, reassert our values, tell people who we are. I mean, right now, there are more voters leaving Labour, according to the polls, August the 26th polls, going to more progressive parties than there are to the right, right? So just imagine a world in which Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana come along and they make a big speech to launch their party and they say, this is not who we are. We have values. We understand people's concerns about immigration, but we're not going to talk like that. This is not who we are. Then what does Keir Starmer do? Then what does Stephen Morgan do? Because he's completely caught, right? I mean, I don't know Keir Starmer, but I'm imagining that he is more of the spirit of this is not who we are than, yes, we've got to, move faster and get people out of the hotels even quicker than Nigel Farage, right? And I think somebody like Stephen Morgan is reflecting, I mean, not just how difficult they find the comms, but on the fact that there isn't a clear message from the top that has told the Labour story. If it was Blair, we know there'd be a story. We know that he would have found a way of explaining to everyone in the party that you can fight things that aren't fair and protect the values of the party you stand for. And that hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, and that is the argument that Labour has to resolve internally.
Yeah.
I just think that there is a conundrum for Labour at the moment, which is, do you lean, and this is what you said at the top, do you lean into reform and think we've got to embrace the reform agenda and talk about all the issues that reform are, and that the greatest threat to Labour, the reason we're hemorrhaging support is because of the rise of reform? Or do you think the reason we're hemorrhaging support is because you've now got Zara Sultana and Corbyn setting up a party, you've got the Green Party being active, you've got Sir Ed Davey joining in the auction saying, I'm not going to a state dinner with Donald Trump. All those 3 parties now are positioning themselves as being to the left and the value-driven alternative to a Labour government that has lost its way. I mean, sure as hell, Starmer has some serious thinking to do. I don't know whether they have alighted on what the solution is to that. I would say over the summer, there has been an absolute vacuum of communication about these issues, about where they see the threat, what they see the future is of the Labour Party. I think that Starmer has the most phenomenal job to do to get this message going in the right direction at the Labour Party conference, because as we stand, we do not know the answer to those questions. We know they're shitting themselves about reform and they're shitting themselves about what may be happening on the left.
Yeah, but I mean, we'd agree that line, Farage is right, don't vote for him, can't hold water. Electorally, it does not get Labour to a place where anyone is convinced, right? So in other words...
But it was only last week, Emily, that that Farage did this big campaign launch, the sort of, at a kind of very big set piece occasion. And he talked about an invasion taking place in Britain, and Downing Street wouldn't contradict that. Now, maybe that is going to change with a new set of new team inside Downing Street.
I think the language is really important. I mean, we are already calling it a small boats crisis, right? A crisis, an immigration crisis. Now, a crisis suggests something that has just kind of like overwhelmed you without anyone being aware of it. This is a problem. I mean, there is definitely a problem with immigration numbers. There's definitely a problem with small boats because you don't want people dying at sea and you don't want them to be stuck forever somewhere in a system that they can't, get out of and never get sort of deported if they need to be deported. But actually, the whole language of crisis, he seems to be leaning into that as opposed to saying, can everyone keep their heads? illegal immigration is 3% of immigration in this country. And if the immigration numbers are too high, maybe you want to look at what they were 10 years ago before we left the EU. That's a good place to start.
There's one other thing we just ought to discuss quickly before we move on, and we've spent quite a bit of time talking about this reshuffle, and that is Darren Jones' position. Is Darren Jones now, in effect, the Deputy Prime Minister? Downing Street has been at pains to say, no, he's not the Deputy Prime Minister. What else can they say? But I think the question is going to reverberate because on all sorts of levels, Angela Rayner is going to become a slightly more marginal figure. Yes, she'll stand in for Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions when Starmer is away at some international conference or other. But realistically, Darren Jones is going to be sitting in on all the committees, all the big decision making. And I think he is being given a considerable amount of power over strategy and the day-to-day direction of the government and how you deliver. And a lot of people would say, well, that is the Deputy Prime Minister's job.
He's good at fighting fires, isn't he, Darren Jones? I mean, we've had him on a number of times, normally around the budget. And
Very calm and
he's
soothing.
very calm, and he just sort of, he can sort of bash things down. I mean, the other person I think we should talk about is Manoush Shafiq, who comes in from the Bank of England, Deputy Governor, so a really hot economist, and she will be working in the Treasury. Torsten Bell, formerly of the Resolution Foundation, now an MP, also part of the Treasury. And I mean, I guess the question is whether you see them as overriding the Rachel Reeves position or bolstering her. Because I think it's pretty clear that she has got an awful job, right? At the end of October, she's boxed herself in every single way and feels like, at this point, who knows, run out of ideas to get more money into the country, right? And
You'd understand if she was in tears about it. I mean, you know.
For example. Yeah. I mean, I think Manoush Shafiq is clearly been brought in so that Starmer can technically leave Reeves in place. Can't touch her. Don't want to upset the bond markets, blah, blah, blah. But presumably, she will be the one now tasked with coming up with massively innovative ideas, right? Or the guts to say, yeah, we need to borrow more, or we need to, tax in this way or that way, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, the proof of this is going to be longer term when we see what changes it's make. I just worry that an awful lot of people will have a look at this on social media or wherever they get their news and think a whole bunch of people I've never heard of have just been replaced by another whole bunch of people I've never heard of. And what difference will any of this make? And that is the challenge for Starmer, to show that it is different.
Well, 65% of Reform voters don't recognise Richard Tice. And he's the deputy of the party that they love. So I think it is not necessarily a good indication of what the public thinks, whether they've heard of somebody or they can recognise somebody or whatever. I mean, the public responds to things that change and things that improve their lives. Fundamentally, if your life improves, you give the government another shot.
We will be back in just a moment discussing Donald Trump, his bruised hand, and what it tells us.
The president is in incredibly good health. He's got incredible energy. And while most of the people who work around the president of the United States are younger than he is, I think that we find that he actually is the last person who goes to sleep. He's the last person making phone calls at night. And he's the first person who wakes up and the first person making phone calls in the morning. So, yes, things can always happen. Yes, terrible tragedies happen. But I feel very confident the President of the United States is in good shape, is going to serve out the remainder of his term and do great things for the American people. And if, God forbid, there's a terrible tragedy, I can't think of better on-the-job training than what I've gotten over the last 200 days.
I just imagine the tips of his fingers coming together in that panto villain sort of meme.
If something terrible
if something should happen to him, I would be able to step in.
Yeah, that was J.D. Vance a few days before Donald Trump sort of disappeared. It's a mark of how ubiquitous Donald Trump is. Yeah. Every day, every hour, we're seeing him in the Oval Office, on the South Lawn of the White House, in the briefing room, wherever it happens to be. He's there with a camera on him the whole time. And then on Thursday or Friday last week, the White House issued it's kind of what the weekend activities were for the president. He was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't going to be doing any public engagements. He wasn't going to be making any comments. And the rumours started flying that something must be seriously wrong with him. And that we've noticed this kind of thing on his hand, where he's got makeup on his hand covering up the bruising. And there's people thinking, well, there must be something to that. There must be more to it than just he's got bruising on his hands. And we've now learnt that there is something called chronic venous insufficiency.
Venus as in vein related, not
Venus Williams
Exactly.
or a planet.
Or a planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Important to get that distinction.
Caroline Levitt, who I think, to be fair, realised that she couldn't keep saying, he's just got a bruise from shaking hands, without it sounding ridiculous. And so this venous problem means that you don't get enough blood up from your legs and the heart slows down, and so you don't get enough blood going around the body and all the rest of it. I mean, it's interesting. I came to that story over the weekend and just saw the memes, just saw that is Donald Trump dead, and kind of clicked as he would and was like, no, very much not dead. But I think it does feed into a couple of things here. One, he hasn't left Washington for about 2 weeks, which is unusual for him. I mean, yes, most presidents in the summer, they go off, they do their sort of Cape Cod thing, or they do their Florida thing or whatever, and he hasn't taken any noticeable holiday. But he hasn't left Greater Washington for nearly 3 weeks. Even when he's been playing golf, it's been kind of, Virginia, which is 40 minutes away. So you could make that into a sort of argument for, is he staying close to something? Is he reluctant to go too far at the moment? I think the Alaska trip was the last big trip he did. And there's also this question, which I think is more pertinent perhaps, which is, well, given how quick they were to jump down the Democrats' throat at every single image of Biden, the Democrats are just having a field day, saying, don't understand the puffy face, don't understand the bruised hand, don't understand the sort of thick ankles and the swollen, calves. What's going on here? Why aren't you telling us what's really going on?
There is meant to be this whole honesty about the state of the president's health in a way that we don't have. The Prime Minister is not expected to give health bulletins regularly and health updates. Yeah. The president's physician is meant to give updates on the state of health of the president. It happened under Biden, it happened under Trump, it happened under Obama. It was meant to happen regularly, so you couldn't have a position where a president who was really seriously ill was, it was being kept from the American public. All I would say, from my experience of sitting in on some of the briefings that have taken place about the president's health in the briefing room, I think they lie. I think it's so dishonest. Yeah, I think they were dishonest about Biden. Previously, Ronnie Jackson, when he was the president's physician, lied about his health. When Trump went to Walter Reed Medical Center with COVID, and was hospitalized, they lied about his health, and they're lying now.
Look, I mean, just watch Dave. If you don't believe they lie, just watch the film Dave.
Exactly.
Guy's in a coma, right? But Trump has hit back on Truth Social, and he said, never felt better in my life. And DC is a crime-free zone. Now, why is that relevant? Well, probably because he wants to now detract from everyone talking about his health. But crime-free zone presumably means that he's had enough of the National Guard on the streets of Washington. Is he going to send them home? Is he going to say, enough is enough, we've reached our goal? Or is he just trying to basically divert attention from something that is deeply uncomfortable for him, which is people talking about his strength or weakness?
I think Trump hates questions that suggest that he is weak, ill, frail or vulnerable. I think that is Donald Trump through and through. He has to show toughness. He's on top of it. And if the questions about him being physically incapable persist, he will absolutely hate that.
So you can bet that they will.
Exactly. We'll be back after this. So I don't know whether you've been watching the US Open tennis tournament, at which I think Lewis Goodall is in attendance this weekend and this week. So he's busy in New York working hard. But there was a most fantastic, appalling, terrible scene at the end of a match where one of the Polish players, who's won, surprisingly, gives his cap to a little kid as a sort of gesture of kindness. and it's grabbed from the little kid's hand by this middle-aged bloke who turns out to be a millionaire CEO.
I just love the video. The tennis player is Kamil Majchak, and he sort of goes towards this kid, and I think he places the hat on the ball, on the sort of kid's ball, which is in front of him, and the guy next to him just nicks the hat and says, first things first. And what I love about it is that this has blown up into is this guy, the billionaire, the nastiest man on the internet? His name is Piotr Gierek, and he is I think quite a famous sort of entrepreneur in Poland. And he's now had to take himself and his wife off social media because he's now being vilified, the nastiest man on the internet. And it does seem to me, I mean, look, you can have views about whether you should steal things from young kids. Personally, I think it's absolutely fine. Do it the whole
That's
time.
right.
Yeah, always, particularly muffins. I do think that we've turned into this slightly obsessive sort of meme culture. Take Jumbotron. The ability of that one
Image
during
the Coldplay concert.
During the Coldplay concert, which sort of landed upon a couple having an affair, to destroy basically 3 people's jobs, right? Minimum. And many, more people's lives, or certainly marriages. We've kind of found this way of turning these internet moments into something that is so potentially destructive. I mean, the kid was fine. He met the tennis player. He got a cap, he got a selfie, and he's exchanged email addresses, and the kid's made for life now. I mean, he actually needs to thank the billionaire for nicking the cap in the first place.
Can I just tell you about something else about the US Open? Because I think there's a new heroine that you need to discover, because I've been watching a lot of US Open tennis. Taylor Townsend. So most players at the changeover, they have an energy drink and they have a bit of banana or an energy bar. She has a little brown box of sweeties. And she's just picking out a few sweeties to have at the changeover. She is mateless there on the tennis court.
She is my tennis spirit.
Exactly. Right, we will be back tomorrow. It's lovely to have you back, mateless. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.